Well, let me start by saying thank you to the TES for organising this debate. The first debate we've had, the three of us, of this format and this length, and to all of you for coming along, and to those people watching on the internet as well. And with Don't Knows being 37%, I think that tells you why it's really important that we get out there and have these debates and win these arguments, because there's clearly a lot of people who still are yet to make their minds up for this election. I've been Secretary of State for almost 3 years. I'm the second longest serving since Kenneth Baker, which I think probably tells you more about the short tenures of some of my predecessors rather than any great longevity on my part. But I've been doing this job, as I said, for almost 3 years. I've now visited over 250 schools over the last 2.5 years, met many thousands of head teachers, teachers, parents. And I would say that across the piece, talking to people, people recognise the transformation that we've seen in our schools and in school standards since 1997. People remember the dilapidated buildings, the leaking roofs, the shared textbooks, the demoralisation of the teaching profession, the fact that back then only a third of young people at 16 were getting 5 good GCSEs with English and maths. And they've seen the changes in the last 12 years. The 4,000 newly built or refurbished secondary schools, the biggest school building programme since the Victorian era, the doubling of per pupil funding in real terms, the fact we have 40,000 more teachers, the best generation of teachers according to Ofsted we've ever had, also a further 120,000 more teaching assistants. And when you look at standards, in 1997, over half of our secondary schools, over 1,600 secondary schools, were not getting to our basic benchmark in terms of performance. Now that number is not half, it's less than 1 in 12 schools, and we're going to do even more. So there's been a real transformation, and yet it's not enough. Expectations are much higher than they were 12 years ago. I don't think anybody can be satisfied. There's more to do. And the reality is that there is a real challenge for us to make sure we have an education system which delivers not just excellence for some, for a small group, for the average child, but delivers excellence and opportunity for every young person in every school. In my view, that is a moral imperative. I start from this position. Every child has got talent and potential. But for some children, it's harder. Sometimes there's extra barriers, a special need, a disability, the income of their parents. But if the community is willing to work together, we can overcome those barriers and give every child those chances. That moral imperative, though, is in today's world also an economic imperative. These days, every young person needs skills, a qualification if they're going to get a good job, pay the mortgage, save for their pensions. Whether their skills are more academic or more vocational, we've got to have an education system which delivers for them. And that can only be done by great teaching and by inspirational leadership in our schools. I remember back in the first few weeks of my job, I went to visit a secondary school in Oxfordshire. And I arrived at 8:30 in the morning with agreement with the head teacher, went to the staff meeting. I was unannounced and unrecognised for the whole meeting. I'm not sure I'd get away with that now. And then, later in the day, I toured around the school. Later in the day, I went to an English lesson. It was a Year 9 lesson. It was one of the lower ability sets. It was quite a challenging group, 2 or 3 children with real issues about concentration. 2 teaching assistants did a great job in that lesson, helping the teacher. The teacher was teaching similes and metaphors, and she did it with a bag of sherbet lemons. She gave every young person in Year 9 a sherbet lemon, 25 of them, and they were asked to talk about and then write about what it looked like, what it felt like, what it smelt like, what it reminded them of. And then finally, as the tension built, finally, in the last 5 minutes, they were finally allowed to put it in their mouth and talk about what it tasted like, what it was like to bite it. It was a really hard lesson. It was hard to keep control. At the end of that lesson, every young person in that class knew what similes and metaphors were. I was stood at the back. I was absolutely exhausted, and I was just watching. That was the 5th lesson that teacher had taught that day. That is what raised the standards in our school. Brilliant inspirational teaching, backed by strong leadership, an engaging curriculum which suits all young people, strong discipline, supported by teaching assistants, wider children's services supporting schools to tackle every barrier to children's progress, and that school is now supporting other schools in its community to raise standards. And it's building on those foundations which we've got to keep doing. There's more to do. Our schools white paper challenges to get schools working with schools, to make sure that we have a report card which delivers for the first time fair accountability, which really measures the progress of every child at every school, and also one-to-one catch-up tuition for those who fall behind. And in tough times, it's going to mean more resources. I've announced today rising real terms funding for schools, but we'll have to make tough decisions, including particularly in my department, to fund those rising resources. There is another way. The other way is to abolish the national curriculum, to encourage schools just to opt out, to say there's no role for local authorities, only central direction and local leadership, to say to parents, if you want a good school, set it up down the road or get a company to do so, to divert the money to them, to say to other children in declining schools, wither and decline with falling budgets, even though their educational one-off chance is lost. I say that is unfair. It is unaffordable. We know when it's been tried internationally in Sweden, it led to falling standards and more social inequality, reversing the rising standards we have seen in the last 12 years. That would be the wrong choice, in my view. I understand that some people in the press and political opponents have to say, in the face of rising standards, well, the exams must be getting easier, the school system is failing. I don't think we should score political points by running down the achievements of young people and great teachers who are working harder and doing better than ever before. The motion says, contrary to the views of the popular press, and I would add some politicians, our teachers and our schools are doing better than ever. I congratulate all the people delivering that brilliant achievement, and I say if we work together, we can do even better in the future.